The war is on against the enemies of the truth. Martin North, John Adams and Edwin Almeida, in the interest of the people. Hello John, hello Edwin, good to see you.
Hello Martin, hello Edwin.
G'day John and Martin, pleasure to see you guys. And since we're going to be doing these more regularly, can we have is there a peace sign or anything? We're going to use any protocol there, Martin?
Well, I think basically it's he who shouts the loudest will be heard. And welcome first to the Interest of the People channel, Edwin. You are very privileged because you are the first to come join the party, as it were, on our no holds barred, tell it as it is channel.
Well, anything to support Uppercut Adams, as you know. He's been giving it out there. He's been punching it out, threatening to eat my babies and so forth. But hey, let's do a few rounds. I don't mind doing a few sparring rounds with Uppercut Adams.
Yeah, very good. And I think you actually threatened with a boxing glove the other day, so that John told me that was quite funny. So I think that the purpose of this conversation is to just go through some of the pretty remarkable things that are happening with regard to perhaps, let's call them spruikers to be polite, but people who have extremely strong points of view about things without really any evidence. And each of us in our own way have effectively been impacted one way or the other by this over the last little while.
Yeah, can I just interject there a little bit, Martin? When you say without any evidence, but can we also perhaps add and discuss the fact that a number of these spruikers or a number of these so-called mainstream analysts are actually holding on to very important data. And the question that begs to be asked is, why are they not releasing it in its totality rather in parts and with such delays? I'm talking about economists that are associated with the REA and also with Domain.
Okay, very interesting question. And in fact, I did a piece of work which will come out in a future post on the DFA channel where I looked at all of the different information sets relating to Liverpool, right? And basically, some people are saying there's a fall of 6% over the last 12 months for houses. Others are saying more than 20%. And basically, none of them agree. So we are in an information deficit, I think, and I do believe with you, Edwin, that in some cases some of that information is being withheld or filtered or just slowed. Now, I know that John's got some specific things he wants to cover today, John. So where should we start this conversation?
Sure. Yeah. So what I thought would be good to have this conversation about is so I mean you to a lesser extent, Martin, but particularly in the last probably 8 weeks, Edwin and I have been very aggressive on Twitter in particular, and we've sort of butted heads against a whole bunch of these spruikers. These spruikers have massive conflicts of interest, either because of their job or because of particular investments, and they keep on talking the market up. So I've been on the attack. Edwin's been on the attack. Some interesting things have come out of that. Obviously the biggest thing for me was I was effectively invited to go on the Switzer show to go up against Christopher Joy, because some people have asked me, how did I get on the show? And I said, well, I took Switzer to task because he has a finance company, he's a mortgage broker, he says the market is going well, soft landing, all of this sort of stuff, and I sort of said, well, the data doesn't reflect that, let's have a live debate on YouTube. He goes, well, come on my show. Come on the show. Christopher Joyce's quote, debt serviceability at this point is fine. 3 weeks later, he blocks me on Twitter, and now he's basically saying something very different in a couple of social media posts that he's been putting out because of what's really happening in the residential mortgage-backed security market.
Okay. Right. So we're talking then about people using Twitter, people blocking other people on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
And basically preferring to narrow in their field of focus for people who support their views and not effectively debate and engage with the alternative views, which actually I think are building more and more. So, there is more and more evidence of slowing GDP, of higher household debt, of, slowing the broader economy slowing, right? And it seems to me that even as that's happening, the spruikers are preferring to say, oh, no, auction rates are growing, more lending, so therefore everything's absolutely fine. So they're trying to actually sort of talk the economy up, it seems to me, despite the fact that the reality is, and the true data is actually saying something very different.
Exactly. I mean, we have seen, look, a lot of these institutions in terms of the IMF, in terms of even now the Reserve Bank, S&P, a few different bodies are slowly revising, and even Moody's slowly revising their forecast down in terms of price declines for Sydney and Melbourne. They were saying, small declines at the beginning of the year. Now there's been some dramatic revisions down. Going back to last year, there was basically supposed to be sort of, a half decent year in the market. And again, a lot of, I would say unsophisticated property buyers, either owner-occupiers or investors, have been relying on these data sources, these commentators, and the mainstream media, including the ABC, give a platform to some of these people to come on and sort of put their point of view forward. These people have been very wrong about how the market has travelled so far, what the level of risk in the market is. Certain people have signed mortgage documents, I would say under false pretenses. I mean, now the banks and the law would say, well, caveat emptor, you've got to do your own homework. You've got to do your own due diligence. If you sign with a mistaken view, well, you've got to cop that. Now, and to some extent, I'm willing to accept that. But those who continue to go on social media platforms or on mainstream media and say soft landing or clearance rates are going up, or I've been called a number of things. I've been called embarrassing. I've been called crazy. I've been called a doomsday merchant. I've been called a nutcase.
You've been called a coffee addict by me. You do realise that, don't you?
Yeah. I think it's like, so Edwin calls me a coffee addict, but yeah, I mean, look, there's been some very direct attacks at me. When I push back, some of these people have sought to block me. Edwin's been blocked by certain individuals as well. So I call these people the enemies of the truth, because they're not focused or they're not committed to telling people the real situation. So obviously I think part of this conversation is to explore these enemies of the truth and the campaign that's actually happening on social media to really call out, well, what's going on.
I think the counter offensive to this is the fact that the truth is coming out. A lot of our followers are actually posting and searching themselves in various suburbs in Sydney as well as Melbourne. They're putting up comparable sales from, say, 18 months ago to the sales of like property that have been registered in the last couple of months, and you can see in some cases anywhere between 25 and even 32% drops in values, Martin. This is something that you and I have discussed in our previous posts. So there's a big difference and a vast difference. There's a chasm between the fake data that gets released and there's live data, as you and I have spoken many a time. So I think that live data and real data is the offensive that we're charging out with, and a lot of all our followers on the various platforms can see that. Now, I just got quoted on the Australian Financial Review. One of the documents there, you may have seen it also, Martin, and that is the difference in price of a sale which I personally attended to in August 2017 of $515,000 to a like property of a current sale, that a property that just got sold 2 weeks ago at $335,000. So these are anecdotal evidence points, but they are key and strategic points, not only in one area of Sydney, but multiple areas of Sydney, and we're seeing this over and over again. And as John said, the spruikers, the mainstream, these analysts that are holding on to great sources of data are not releasing it in time in order for people to make an educated decision. So I guess in a way we're saying to the people, well, pay very close attention to what you get led into, especially these analysts and economists that are propagating the next hotspots for 2019, the hotspots for 2020. Well, I recall a couple of these analysts earlier in the year saying that parts of Blacktown, certain suburbs of Blacktown, were going to are the next hotspots for 2019, and those suburbs have come down in price from when they called the hotspots in January, late January. In a matter of a few months, they're now 12% below what they were back earlier in the day. So these people need to be taken to task. So I stand alongside John on that, and we need to get the message out.
Yeah, and I think, Edwin, the key point you're making, which is what I believe fundamentally, is the more data that we can show people and the more that we can be complete and definitive about what's going on, the less able those without the data, in other words, just opinion, will be to be able to actually respond, right? Because there's nothing better than more and more and more data all showing the same stuff to ultimately prove the point. And, I guess in 6 months' time, we'll be able to look back and see some of those posts that people put up. It's funny how they suddenly disappear later, isn't it? They suddenly take them off Twitter when they're proved not to be correct.
Well, we've got them. We've tagged a few of them, and we're keeping a log of quite a number of those posts. And interestingly, one of the latest pieces of data that just came out by SQM, Square Meter Research, and I won't name the individual that runs that also blocked me on Twitter, made a big fuss about my analysis of the market and how data is presented to the market, and he called the vacancy rate for Sydney as of this week. He called it at around about 2.1%, and he actually said that there was a drop. Yet within a matter of a day or two from when he released his data, and it was published all over the mainstream media, then you've got the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales putting out their data, which they source from hundreds of offices around New South Wales, and the data actually shows an increase of rental vacancies from 3.4 to 3.6. So, that's live data. That's part of live data and real data when you get it from the people that are actually on the ground, on the field, not from databases or scraping data of websites that are 3 to 6 months old.
Yeah, and that's the key point, right? As I said earlier on, I've just done some work on looking at the different sources of data, looking at Liverpool actually. And what's fascinating about that is that some of the sources of data perpetuating the story that, there's hardly anything to see, that data is 6 to 9 months old and it's not been updated, right? The more recent data, which is available not necessarily just in a public forum, but you actually have to pay for it, is a much deeper fall. And so basically what it says is that the information professionals and the people who are actually in the know have a much better understanding of what's really going on with these falls relative to the stuff that's in the newspapers and relative to the stuff that's available publicly. And that's a real problem. I actually think there should be a code of conduct which basically forces people to declare the source of the information that they're actually quoting, the timing of it, in other words, when did it come from, and the methodology used to adopt it. Because effectively, it seems to me that you can actually have asking price data, which is what some people are using, but asking price is just what people aspirationally would like to see for their property. You can have auction clearance data where the auctions are actually run and effectively where property is sold, but of course often that is not actually declared at all. You can have multifactorial sort of hedonic type data, which is using a whole bunch of different algorithms to try and get the same point, or you can have settlement data, which is 3 months plus old when you actually see it for the first time. Now, all of those things have very different outcomes, and yet people don't understand the difference between all of those different types of data.
No, and one of the pieces of data that you missed out on there, Martin, is that's been propagated of late through the mainstream is the Economist from REA saying that just because they've had numerous hits on a particular area, all of a sudden that's going to become the next hotspot.
Well, today we're doing a property special because I think this is the real curveball for the economy. If we can just arrest the falling house prices, it'd be great for the economy. So we've got Louis Christopher, who actually has done some calculations. He's from SQM Research. He's done some calculations on what negative gearing changes would do to house prices. And also we have the chief economist from the REA Group, or realestate.com.au, Nerida Conisbee. And I reckon that particular website has some pretty interesting insights into real estate.
I had appreciated, Peter, of course, because they dominate the online market and the listings markets for people, and even every agent uses them to promote their properties. They get all the data about people clicking on areas, so they know exactly just where the investors and buyers and are interested, and they can tell by different geography.
Okay, Paul, it's now time to talk to the chief economist of the REA Group, Nerida Conisbee, and I want to know how the market's actually going, and are there some places doing well while we know other places aren't doing so well? So, Nerida, thanks for joining us on the Switzer Show.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Now, tell us about what you think is the current state of the real estate market around the country, and then focus in on Melbourne and Sydney.
Okay, so we are definitely well into a downturn, and it does seem that Sydney is bearing the brunt of price falls. If you have a look around Australia, Sydney pricing is now down around 10% from peak. Melbourne is holding up a lot better. So according to our data, Melbourne is down 4% from peak. Melbourne is holding a lot better in a lot of ways. So not just in terms of pricing, but also in terms of search activity on realestate.com.au. So we can certainly see that there's still a lot of people that are interested in buying. We're still seeing a lot of rental activity. Even offshore property seekers seem to be focusing still a lot on Melbourne, which is not the same situation we're seeing in Sydney. Elsewhere, though, conditions are, again, pretty variable. Brisbane's pretty flat. Hobart's still doing okay. Adelaide's hit its highest median ever recorded. So, things have definitely slowed, but it is Melbourne and Sydney bearing the brunt.
Nerida, you'd have some really interesting data that other people don't see on just where investors and buyers are searching. So does that tell you anything that perhaps some of the general property market reports aren't showing at the moment?
Yeah, look, it certainly does. I mean, if you have a look at some of the markets that are still getting a lot of search activity, places like regional Victoria, Geelong, Bendigo, Ballarat, are still seeing a lot of people having a look around. We're seeing big jumps in places like Byron Bay. So, Byron Bay is an area that is undertaking, or at least currently experiencing a strong price growth. And property seekers from the UK, for example, are really interested in the Byron Bay market, but also locals as well. We can see in Gold Coast that a lot of Sydney property seekers are looking at the Gold Coast at the moment. So we have seen a surge of activity, not just from buyers, but also renters. Offshore buyers, we see around, to give you an idea, when we have a look at tracking IP addresses out of China, we see around 1,000 searches per day coming out of China. We can see now a shift away from very much university suburbs. During the peak of the market, they were very focused on places like Carlton and Clayton and St Lucia in Brisbane, but now have gone back to looking at areas that have high proportions of Chinese-born residents, so places like Chatswood in Sydney and Glen Waverley in Melbourne. So, yeah, we do. We see, lots of fascinating things, and, some things are quite amusing and other things do give us a good indication as to what's happening in the market.
I mean, what planet are you from? And what are you really trying to sell? Are you trying to be a property portal, or are you trying to be a property analyst or an economist? Just give out the facts. Don't start calling your hotspots based on how many searches they've seen. Of course, people are more and more curious, and they're going to check different suburbs for various reasons. Doesn't mean that they're going to go out and buy or they're ready to buy. It doesn't mean that it's going to become the hotspot. But yet they become so enthralled or overwhelmed by the so-called data, and they get so much oxygen on the mainstream with this rubbish.
Yep. Okay. So let's go back to John.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I mean, one of the questions I've got for both of you is, so for the benefit of the viewer, I mean, where do you think are the key points of where these spruikers are trying to exaggerate. So I've got a bit of a list. So auction clearance rates, we hear that quite a bit.
Yep.
I mean, Edwin referred to vacancy rates. That's another area where there's exaggeration. Now, last week there was some interesting interactions between what the Reserve Bank said around in terms of LVRs and in terms of negative equity. And obviously, Martin, you were on 7:30 vis-a-vis Kukulos about that point. Now, I thought the most enlightening tweets last week was from Lindsay David at LF Economics, basically saying that the RBA calculates negative equity on a portfolio basis, whereas the Americans did it on a property by property basis. And if we were to do that, the number of mortgages underwater in this country would be far higher than what the Reserve Bank says. So this is not just private sector interest. I mean, there is a whole people in APRA and the Reserve Bank who also have a commitment to trying to exaggerate. So there's some key areas. I think the level of systemic risk in the economy that continues to be underplayed, and this whole notion of the soft landing. So these are the points that I continually see where they're continually trying to exaggerate. And obviously the one I saw in the last 24 hours is we're going to see a massive uptick in investor buying between now and Christmas because people want to beat Bill Shorten's changes to in terms of negative equity. Tax changes in terms of
negative gearing.
Negative gearing.
Yeah. Well, that one is a very interesting one. My surveys say there's a very slight, but hardly anybody's really buying that as a strategy. In terms of negative equity, I calculate the negative equity on a household basis, and I do it on a real household basis rather than at a portfolio level, which is why my negative equity is at 10%, whereas the Reserve Bank's at 3% of households, right? And it almost seems that people are grasping at particular angles on the data to try and support their point of view rather than being objective and independent and saying, let the data speak.
Yeah.
Right? That's the fundamental difference, it seems to me.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think Edwin's made a good point earlier on is, well, if there's an organisation who's got data, they should be actually using the data, not start overlaying additional views that don't have anything to do with the data, like clicks to a website,
Yeah.
It's just nuts. But it's all about trying to actually build a message to the broader community to say, no, there's no problem, just keep buying, there'll be no issue. That's the problem I've got, is that people are being persuaded, cajoled into making bad decisions. And nobody's going to actually turn around later and say, oh, sorry, no, the buck stops with those poor people who actually made the wrong decision because they were misled by people who actually wasn't telling the right story.
So before we get to that point of accountability, so beyond those areas that I've identified, have you noticed, Martin, and we'll go to Edwin next, about other points or other areas of where the spruikers are trying to exaggerate either the data or the state of the market?
Yeah, so the affordability and repayment profiles, right?
Yes.
So people keep saying, oh, no, everybody's fine because, the interest rates have come down, so therefore, repayments are not a problem. Christopher Joy, of course, trotted that argument out. That's completely rubbish. And if you actually look at the latest data from the Reserve Bank, you'll see that, in fact, it's going up quite significantly now because incomes are flat and costs of living are rising and all those sorts of things.
Yes.
So that's one area. The other one is the number of people who are actually registering as in difficulty in the bank portfolios is really interesting, because what they actually do is they put households into three buckets, right? They put the households that are fine into one bucket, they put the people who are slightly behind in another bucket, and they put the people who are severely adversely behind in the third bucket, right? But what they then do when they make provisioning calculations is they actually use a negative number on the first bucket, which is the big one, to offset the potential losses in the other two buckets.
Right.
So the overall provisions that are actually in the bank's numbers are significantly lower than they should be. Right? And that's fine until such times as we get more of the sort of core portfolio effectively getting differently. So there's a whole bunch of questions around how provisions work, and even things like marking to market the price of the property, right? Because they've still got the original prices when the loan was taken out, but of course if prices have come down by 20%, those prices should be actually marked to market.
Yep.
And that would actually then have another adverse impact on the bank's capital position. So those are some of the things that I'm concerned about.
Sure. And in terms of you, Edwin, I mean, look, beyond what Martin and I have discussed, any other sort of points in which you see exaggeration by the spruikers?
Well, the exaggeration by the spruikers comes back and stems from the vested interest and as to what they're trying to peddle. You've got obviously REA and Domain saying the properties are going that there's greater sentiment now, so let's take your property to market and sell. Not for the obvious reasons that they're underwater, or not for the obvious reasons to get out before they start really drowning, but more for the fact that they obviously, the more properties are on those portals, the more advertising dollars they collect, and the better off the shareholders are going to be. So I think the messages that are going out is the wrong message, and then you've got the spruikers that rely on the auction clearance rates, 1 point of referencing the entire market, but you only got to look at the one that propagates that the most, and you got to look at historically, or even possibly even currently, that is also presenting for a company called Red Door, and who do they market to? They market to Asian investors. This whole thing is trying to stimulate the overseas investors to come back into the market. I read a report yesterday, or an article yesterday, about REA signing some recent agreement with the Chinese portal, one of the biggest portals in China, to again propagate and push our properties, or the investment properties from here over to China. Let's get one thing straight, folks. The reason why a lot of the Asian investors came into the market was very speculative, and because they, in reality, from my sources, in various sources, multiple sources, they told me that they really didn't want to settle on these in the first place. All they wanted to do was park $150,000 on by way of a deposit on a property. That property was going to increase in value, and then sell it down to the local market that was supposed to absorb it, and their 150,000, 10% would make them an extra 150,000 on the other end once they resold. That was one of the main reasons of parking, or investing into Sydney, particularly Sydney, and particularly from the agents that I got told. So they're trying to that told me that information. So what they propagate, or what they're pushing for, is to see what is going to be the next government stimulus, or the next push, in order to stop this hard fall. And to be honest with you, I don't think the government have got any idea. Everybody's trying to stimulate the market, whether it's the Labor, or whether it's the Liberals, whether we have a hung parliament, no matter what we have. You know what? We're going to hit, as Martin says it over and over again, Control Alt Delete. We're going to hit rock bottom, and it's only a matter of how quickly. It's not a matter in when we're going to hit bottom, but but everybody's trying to put these stops. And going back to the what the spruikers are pushing, you only have to research the fact that some of these spruikers have got mortgage books. Obviously, with the main portals, they've more advertising on the portals, more listings, more money. Others, some may even have investments. Some of these other spruikers may even have investments in development sites, properties. Once you get to the background, then you start realizing why. I mean, there are others that I'm not going to say who, but they're the ones that push personally, because I don't want to defame anybody, but the ones that push Queensland. And why? Because the whole database, because they sell to investors that buy in Queensland. They've been selling to investors that buy in Queensland, in Melbourne, and in the past they've been selling to investors that have bought through the super funds, or bought the so-called cheaper investments over in WA. And now they're in the world of caca, and they're going to find themselves stuck. So I guess it's just coming from all sides, John. So it's really it's our word to the wise is be skeptical with a lot of the information, and be skeptical with some of the stuff that I put out as well. Test me. Go out and do your own research. As I say over and over again, don't just rely on me. Don't just rely on Martin. Don't just rely on Uppercut Adams. Don't just rely on all these other things that are posted out there. Do your own research. Call the local agents. They're a great source of local information.
Yeah, no, that's good advice, Edwin. And of course, people often want simple answers and they want quick answers, but unfortunately, in the situation that we're in, quick answers and simple answers often don't actually tell you what's really going on. As I keep talking about, averaging is a real problem. You have to get into detail. You have to look at individual numbers. And John, one question for you with regard to all of the the blocking and the Twitterati and all that sort of stuff, right? I mean, that doesn't stop you. In fact, that fires you up even more, doesn't it?
Of course,
Yeah.
of course. Because the thing is that I haven't blocked anyone, and I'm not sure if Edwin's blocked anyone. But I mean, so on the issue of accountability, now if I'm wrong, I'm willing to say I'm wrong and why I think I'm wrong. So I have a website. It's all public. All my analysis, all my articles is open for, and all my videos is open for anyone to see. I don't take anything down. So I stand by my work. And I know you stand by your work. Edwin stands by his comments. So we're willing to be held accountable. But there are people out there who say things like a Christopher Joy, and then basically tries to walk away and say, maybe I didn't say that. I tried to say something. I tried to say something else. And the reality is that the hard because you've got opinion makers in the press and you've got hard news journalists. Well, the hard news journalists are not going around and saying so and so said X, that X comment was wrong. Is that person going to be held accountable? So I think there's a couple of key points. The first is, now, if people are negative equity, a lot of these people are unlikely to reverse their positions, even though that certain people are hoping, and I've spoken to some of these people, they're hoping for a market reversal so they can get out of negative equity. So I think in those situations, it's only going to get worse. So obviously, if you are in bad financial shape, I mean, you need to take, I think, quick action, getting the appropriate advice so that you can try to resolve it. I've had certain people sort of say, I'm thinking of buying, I'm thinking of selling, I'm thinking of holding, not really sure. Well, yeah. So again, just like Edwin said, I think these people need to do a lot of research, listen to a whole host of voices. Now, to be honest, I've never said to anyone, sell. And I know you haven't,
Yep.
but there are certain people who have decided to sell their property based on our videos. And again, we're not saying to anyone to do a certain action, but we're just trying to highlight what we think the real situation is. And because of that, people need to make their own choices. So I think that's important as well. And yeah, I think people need to look at, in terms of people's track records, who comes with vested interests, who doesn't, who tries to be honest, who tries to present the most accurate picture possible, and who's willing to be held to account, and who are trying to obfuscate the truth, and hopefully people, if they are selective in who they listen to, they can they can have a better sort of frame of reference in the way they make these financial decisions.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And my advice to people is always, when you listen to somebody, don't just listen to what they say, but understand where they're coming from, who they represent, right? Do a little bit of Googling and a little bit of searching to see, the context, because quite often you'll find that they've got a property firm that they're also involved with, or they're selling mortgages as well. I mean, in that situation, and they're making a particular point of view, you cannot be sure that they aren't actually just talking their book. Right?
Exactly.
And my observation is people who are talking their book will get found out. All right?
Well, hang on. So my question is, will they? So we're having these Twitter wars, but if people are in severe negative equity, those who kept on saying the market was fine. Well, just look at 10 years ago in the US. Did bankers go to jail? Did real estate people go to jail? Did commentators go to jail? Everyone just carried on. So, I do have a fear that those who kept on pumping up the market on social media, but also in the press, they're just going to carry on with their lives and careers with no accountability. And obviously for me, the ones that are most critical are the public officials, because they're the ones that ultimately have to represent the public interest, whereas you can say that people in a commercial setting are there to make money, and commercially, they still have to be honest. But the law allows them to sort of bend the truth to a certain degree, but not out and out fraud. And yet, the public officials are the ones that in my view, have not served the public interest.
No, I agree. Well, we must bring this to a close because I guess we could go on talking about this for all night. So, John, thank you very much for your time. Edwin, thank you very much for your time. I think the message is, guys, if you're seeing information, don't just swallow it whole. Ask hard questions, and be critical. And remember that there are often agendas behind.
Yeah, and Martin, can you just ask me if I've blocked anybody?
Edwin, have you blocked anybody?
Well, I'll tell you what, that's a good question, Martin. Thanks for asking. I'm about to block you because you're a bloody doomsayer. And stop putting out those posts at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Monday. It wrecks my week. And Uppercut Adams, I'm going to not only block you, I'm going to go down to Wollongong and punch you out again.
You heard it here first, folks. But I don't think Edwin is totally serious.
Well, look, perhaps in the next 6 months you will find a camera in an octagon with Edwin and I having it out.
Okay, well, if you set up a match, I'll come and film it. Edwin,
You're
John,
on.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Martin North, John Adams, Edwin Almeida. In the interest of the people, we'll see you next time.